Hey everybody, welcome to the all brand new live Atheist Experience television show out of Austin, Texas. Welcome. How you doing? I'm Matt Dillahunty. This is Tracy Harris. We are here today. It's a live call-in show. You'll be able to call in just as soon as I put the telephone numbers up on the screen. We like to talk to people about what they believe and why, and also about what we do or don't believe and why. Boy, the announcements just got shortened a whole lot today. After we're done with the show, we'll be at El Arroyo. They'll have the address up for you on the screen. But I want to get started by turning it over to Tracy right off the bat, because you had something you wanted to address really quickly before we get the calls.
Yeah, it is really quick too. And it's like, on the one hand, it's something that I was saying is it's so common that it almost seems like you shouldn't have to talk about it, and yet it gives people such a hard time that I just wanted to go over a couple things real briefly. And that is, I want to talk a little bit about the argument from ignorance. And I know everybody in the audience is like, oh, you know, we know what this is. I know what it is, you know what it is, and yet we still get letters from atheists confused about things, and it's, hey, this is the argument from ignorance. Why don't you recognize this? And so I have come to understand that it's very difficult sometimes for people to recognize it. And one of the things is, I did for a while started getting into debunkings. Like we did a show, I think, on debunking the miracle claims, a couple of miracle claims, and I did some debunkings at the blog. And I just want to say that, you know, I really didn't want and don't ever want debunking to be like my thing. And part of that is because when you're doing a debunking, it's like you've thrown up your hands and just given up and said, okay, I will accept as a hypothetical that the argument from ignorance is valid. It's not an error in reason. Because the only way you could get to requiring a debunking is for someone to be sold into the argument from ignorance as a valid thing. So when someone says, I had this experience and I saw this ghost, and then they tell you the story, or I had this experience, I saw an angel, and they tell you the story, or I had this experience and I saw, you know, whatever, and they give you what they saw, you know, like label it like the ghost thing, and say, this was my experience and I saw this and it was a ghost. And you'll say, well, how do you know that this was a ghost? Well, what else could it have been? Okay, now you're asking me to offer an alternate explanation before you will let go of your assumption. You haven't demonstrated that it's a ghost. You haven't demonstrated that how you know ghosts exist. You haven't demonstrated that what you saw, you know, what is a ghost, and how do you know that what you saw was a ghost? And you don't know they exist. You don't know what they do. You don't know what this was. And you're jumping to a conclusion without really having done anything except assume that you saw a ghost. And then you're basically saying, I'm just sticking with my completely ignorant assumption until you can show me that it was something else. Well, that's invalid reasoning. And there are some people who will let go of it when you point it out and you say that you're using the argument from ignorance and this is what you're doing. And sometimes people will back down and they'll say, you know what, you're right, I don't know what I saw. I know that it was like I experienced XYZ, and yeah, I did jump to the conclusion that it was a ghost because that's kind of like what people describe, but honestly, I don't know what it was, and I may never know what it was, and you're right, that's just kind of how I need to classify that as an unknown. Okay, well, thank you for seeing reason. But sometimes people don't see reason, and you have to just keep going, keep going, keep going, and then ultimately it gets into, let me look this up, let me see what you're describing, and here's what probably happened to you based on what you're describing. And you offer an alternate explanation. 9 times out of 10, the person will be like, oh, wow, I'd never heard of that before, and yes, it probably was that. And then, only then, are they willing to let go of this assumption. And it's sad to me. Like, I think I posted on my page today when I posted the announcement for the show that, you know, watch it live or you'll make Jesus cry. And when you push me for a debunking and you won't let go of the argument from ignorance, you make my heart sad. So I'm just letting you know that you make Tracy cry when you don't understand the argument from ignorance and you insist on a debunking to make you let go of an unreasonable assumption. The other time that I saw it recently, which is another thing that, it was one person brought it up, but please understand that this is not about this one person. I understand this is a common problem for people, and that's why I'm discussing it, but I really thought it was just one person. I wouldn't even bring it up. But I had made a comment on, I think it was last time I was on, that one of the callers called in and he was talking about miracles in the Bible and prophecies in the Bible, and, you know, what about, you know, where did the universe come from and life come from? And I said, it doesn't matter if all of those miracle claims were true. If Jesus really turned water into wine, if Jesus really came back from the dead, you have not demonstrated a God. You're just using the argument from ignorance. You're saying that this person came back from the dead and I assume it was a God because I don't know how to explain it, right? I need that debunking, or else I'm just going with the assumption it's a God. It doesn't matter that I don't know what a God is, and I've never seen one, and we've never objectively verified it exists, and we've never been able to examine one. We don't know if gods are the types of things that would even care about bringing people back from the dead if they did exist. I mean, we have no idea what a God is. We can't examine it. We can't verify any claims about God. If somebody comes back from the dead and they say, God brought me back from the dead, well, I mean, I'm amazed you came back from the dead, but I don't know how you did it. I don't know what happened. I don't know what brought you back from the dead. So when you're I understand you're saying God did it. I don't know if you're honest. I don't know if you're sane. I don't know, what has convinced you that it was a God that did it, but I don't know, and you haven't verified it, and you haven't demonstrated it, and you don't have anything to explain to me how it is you came to the conclusion that it was a God that did it. I don't know what gods are. I don't know what they do. And it's the same with, how'd you turn water into wine? I have no idea how somebody would do that. If that really occurred, and we, had a study where we had all kinds of controls, and we saw somebody just, turn to wine, and there it goes. I don't know how they did it. And if they said God is what gave them power to do it, we still don't know how they did it. We know they're claiming God said it, but gave them that power, but we wouldn't know. So my point when I made the comment was, it doesn't matter what you're showing me as far as effects. You've got to demonstrate your cause God, or else you're just saying that God is the cause, and you're not really demonstrating how you come to that conclusion. And it's the same with the intelligent design argument. It's the same idea. It's like, there's this stuff, and I can't explain it. It's so crazy that it just has to be a God. It's like, well, you haven't demonstrated it. So it's like this argument from ignorance. And what they were asking me was, in their mind, it seemed unfair. It was like, well, if somebody can present you with miracles, if someone were able to present you, assuming, like hypothetically, with real prophecies, with real miracles, with real, showing you that there were these true miracles, that there were these true prophecies, wouldn't that be, at what point would that be a demonstration of a God? And I said, at no point is that a demonstration of a God, because at no point does an argument from ignorance become evidence. It doesn't matter if you have 2 arguments from ignorance or 3 arguments from ignorance, it never becomes evidence. And finally, what I said that I think helped them understand it, and I posted this elsewhere, just my response to it, and other people said, this is really helpful and you should share this, so I'm sharing it. I basically said, it's like trying to use 0 to get to 1. It doesn't matter how many zeros you add together, it never equals 1. You can't get to evidence from a list of arguments from ignorance. And no matter how many things you attribute to God, if you can't demonstrate that it is cause God, and you're just making the claim that the cause is God, and all you're showing are effects, but no, you're not showing how you validated that cause, you are making an assumption with no information, just out of ignorance. So no matter how much of that you pile on, you could pile on arguments from ignorance for the next 3 years at the rate of like 1 per minute, and you still don't ever come to an ounce of evidence.
Yeah, you're not a step closer.
Yeah.
In simplest terms, argument from ignorance just means X is true because X has not been proved false. And that is the basis of the fallacy for argument from ignorance. There's Dawkins identified and labeled a slightly different version, which I think is the one we hear more often. He calls it the argument from personal incredulity, because X is true because I can't think of a better explanation, which is a failure of imagination.
Yeah.
In both of those, I mean, all that's really happening is a shifting of the burden of proof. And as Tracy's pointing out, we may be able to get to identify that a phenomenon has occurred, but we cannot get to the cause of that phenomenon until we have some demonstrable possible cause that we can evaluate. And we never get there with the God things. The other thing is that people have a general discomfort with not knowing.
Some people do.
And yeah, well, I think by and large this affects all of us in different areas. But rather than having no answer, they'll seem to latch on to any answer or the first answer. And in some cases, people will send us an email and say, look at this and this and this and this and this and this and this. There's just no way that couldn't be caused by God. I had an interaction over this past week with a Muslim talking about how the Quran has all this scientific information in it. It doesn't. But he's like, well, this is 1,400 years ago, and, how did they know this and this and this and this and this? And I'm saying, first of all, I don't see any demonstration that they actually knew anything. You're taking passages and you're interpreting them when you already have the knowledge. But even if you were correct that they knew all this information, you can't get from them knowing it to how they knew it. Maybe a God told them. Maybe some advanced aliens told them. Maybe they guessed and got right. Maybe it's a coincidence. Or maybe, what I think is most likely, they didn't know a damn thing, and you're reading into the text what you want. You want this to be true, you want this to be meaningful and powerful, and so you're like, hey, this thing here says the earth is round, and guess what? We found out it's round. Well, in the case of the Quran, I got to kind of laugh that one off, since the Greeks knew the shape of the earth about, 700-800 years before the Quran was written. But argument from ignorance and the argument from personal incredulity, both of them are just shifting the burden of proof, and we get nowhere, and we hear them all the time.
Yeah, don't let somebody get away with assuming cause.
Yeah. Now, it is okay to, as Tracy was talking about with the debunking, to go ahead and assume for the sake of argument a point that they're making in order to show that it's absurd. There's an argument, reducto ad absurdum. Basically, you start with this premise and you show that it leads to something that's patently false, and so you can reject the premise. And that's okay to do. That's encouraged to do.